Ron, is Councilmember Benoit on? Do you know?
He is. He may have stepped away.
Oh,
I mean, why don't you give it a minute?
okay.
All right. If you want to go ahead and do the intro remarks.
Yes, sir. Yeah, good morning. This is Amir. Good morning. Thank you for participating in our remote meeting for the Stationary Source Committee. We will do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation. We ask that everyone be patient as we navigate this together. We have two formats for participation, the Zoom web application as well as teleconference. Before we begin, I want to review some guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. These are very important, so I ask that you pay close attention. Please silence your other communication devices, such as your cell or desk phone. This will ensure that we're not hearing any feedback or causing interruption during the meeting. During the meeting, all participants on Zoom, except for board members and South Coast AQMD staff, will be placed on mute by the host. That means you will not be able to mute or unmute your lines manually. After each agenda item, the chair will announce public comment. For those on Zoom, if you would like to make public comment on the Zoom screen, please click on the raised hand button. This will signal to the host that you would like to provide public comments, and you will be added to the list. If you are using Zoom on your smartphone, please tap the raise hand button on the bottom of the screen. For those calling in using the phone line only, you can dial *9 on your keypad to signal that you would like to comment. Your name will be called when it's your turn to comment, and the host will unmute your line automatically. Please note, you can hang up or leave the Zoom meeting at any time. Please adhere to speaker time limit. Please treat others with courtesy and civility and respect the public meeting process. Rules prohibiting the use of signs or posters remain in effect for video participation. Profanity, discriminatory comments, or obscene gestures is prohibited. Disorderly, unruly, or aggressive behavior that infringes upon the rights of others or disrupts the good working order of the meeting is also prohibited. Any violation of the above rules can result in your mic being muted, your video feed shut off, or you being dropped from the phone or Zoom meeting lines. And with that, Mr. Chair, the meeting is yours.
Very good, thank you. I see already a hand raised from a Miguel. Let me just make sure that's not a board member that's trying to get in on the attendee side. And looks like we have Gideon. All right,
Yes.
with that, if we can go ahead and do a roll call, and we'll go through and see if we've got all of our board members present.
Councilmember Benoit,
Here.
Senator Delgado, Board Member Krakow,
Present.
Councilmember Mitchell,
Here.
Supervisor Perez,
Here.
Supervisor Rutherford,
Here.
All right. Looks like we have a quorum except for Senator Delgado. I think she will be joining us here shortly. With that, we're going to call the meeting to order, and we'll go into our first item, the summary of the proposed rule amendment for 1111. You got an extra one in there. But
That's okay.
Is this Michael? Is this your item?
It sure is, Chairman Benoit.
Go right ahead.
Thank you very much. So my name is Mike Kraus. I'm a planning and rules manager, and I'm here to present to you the amendments for our Rule 1111, which is seeking to reduce nitrogen oxide emissions from natural gas central furnaces from primarily residents and light commercial. Next slide, please. As you may recall, we did address these proposed amendments back in June. However, the committee did ask us to come back and have a further discussion on things like time extensions for high altitude area furnaces, a potential for a sell-through provision for weatherized units, as well as the issues surrounding a fuel with a non-compliant 40 nanogram per joule furnace, such things as emission differences, pricing differences, enforcement concerns that we have, possibility of a third-party study, and then also to talk about incentives to encourage the early deployment for those compliant furnaces at 14 nanograms per joule. Slide 3, please. With regards to weatherized, there is a compliance option currently available to pay a mitigation fee in lieu of complying with the 14 nanogram per joule limit. But however, that expires comes for the 1st of October of this year. 3 of the manufacturers currently believe they will have market coverage by that point. However, other manufacturers are still being challenged by the COVID situation. So back in June, we did propose to move this 6 months in extension. However, in order to address the issue of potential sell-through for the weatherized, meaning how do manufacturers and distributors manage their existing inventory, we decided to allow an additional 6 months. So we're proposing a full year extension. In addition, we're coupling that with a $500 incentive or rebate to early deployment of those compliant weatherized units out there. Next slide, please. With regards to high altitude units, currently, there is, again, an endpoint at the beginning of October of this year. 2 manufacturers currently have certified units up in the high altitude area. If you recall, these are the units that need to be tested in high elevation areas. And so some of the manufacturers are being challenged due to COVID and being able to go out to places like Colorado into the high altitude areas and do the proper testing that they need to do for these units. There's one manufacturer that believes they will have an installation up to 7,000 feet, but we're being conscientious of the other manufacturers. So we are proposing to extend that time frame for the condensing and non-condensing units up in the high altitude areas. And we're also coupling that again with a $500 rebate for those folks installing a compliant unit in the high altitude areas. Next slide, please. We do have an outstanding issue here. This deals with an approach brought by some of the industry folks with regards to allowing a dual fuel system. Again, that's a system by which you would have an electric heat pump coupled with a furnace. And their ask is about allowing a non-compliant furnace to be installed in these dual fuel systems. This could provide additional consumer choice. This could be especially helpful in areas that are currently potentially underserved, such as the high altitude areas. So staff is proposing to allow these dual fuel systems with a non-compliant 40 nanogram per joule furnace coupling with the electric heat pump up to an additional year from the further extension we already are allowing for these types of units in that area until 2022. In addition to that, what we learned from this whole process of the dual fuel systems is the study that was presented by the UC Davis. And in that study, it talked about how our region is a real good region for the usage of a full electric heat pump because of our temperatures that we are blessed with here in this region. And so we thought to ourselves, why not propose an incentive to kind of move that forward? Because that's really great for air quality, right? An all electric heat pump system. So we're proposing a rebate for up to $1,000 for those installations of an electric heat pump system. However, one of the issues that we are tackling, however, is the idea of allowing for this dual fuel system coupled with a non-compliant furnace for the whole basin wide. And there's and I want to express some of our concerns on that. So if we can move to slide 6, I'll go and highlight those. First off, emissions. So this has been sort of an issue that's been raised about, when you do the dual fuel system, even with the non-compliant system or non-compliant furnace, we will get less emissions. Well, that's sort of true. That is really dependent upon the amount of time by which that furnace is operating. And we calculate that would have to be less than 9 hours on a given day. And I'll provide an example for you in a moment. The other issue is enforcement. We don't enforce in this rule based on hours. We don't go into individual residences and make that determination. It's also difficult for our enforcement team when going out there and looking at these distributing places and seeing a non-compliant furnace and knowing that that furnace is going to be sold and utilized in a dual fuel setting as opposed to just set up as a standalone. Another concern that's being raised by some of my manufacturers is about equity. Other manufacturers out there have spent over the past decade and millions of dollars to come up with a 14 nanogram per joule system, even in dual fuel setups, and are kind of feeling that would undercut, the efforts that they have made. And that we also kind of put on them by having this rule. And then finally, we have to remember that what we're talking about when we say, is it less emissions coming from this dual fuel setup? We're talking about a mass-based system, as opposed to the way we've designed this rule 40 years ago, which was concentration-based. So the idea being that from the beginning, the manufacturers developed the system, tested at its concentration, and then it's basically hands off and allow that go through its full supply chain system. So we're really changing the paradigm of this rule if we decide to go that way. Okay, next up, please. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, one of the issues that that the committee raised last time was about costs, wanting to get an idea. So we wanted to present to you some of the consumer costs. This is based upon information we received from 3 manufacturers and 1 installer. So of the little houses, you'll see on the first left here, this is basically the cost for replacing that system with a compliant system, so around $4,000. And as you heard from the industry, that's about in line with the dual fuel with a non-compliant furnace. And that's about true. So on that second section there, you'll see the non-compliant system around that same price. And it was true that the industry raised last time about it's going to cost more if they do the dual fuel system with a compliant system, with a compliant furnace. So, and we show that there. So that difference is about $500 to $600. And that's why we're proposing to provide a rebate for those installing a dual fuel system with that, to kind of get them, to push them over the edge and make those decisions. And then finally, about the heat pump system, as I noted to you, we're proposing $1,000. The reason for that is we recognize that Southern California Edison also has a program by which they can get up to around $1,000 as well. Thus, they'll be getting a rebate of $2,000, and that should cover the costs, particularly when you're trying to upgrade your home setup to allow for an all-electric heat pump system. Next slide, please. So we wanted to, the other issue that was raised by the committee last time was about what are we talking about when we're talking about emissions? What does it mean when we're talking about emissions of the dual fuel? So we wanted to create a scenario by which this could happen. Okay, so remember the dual fuel system, it needs a switchover. So in the case of that was presented to us, the switchover would be about 32 degrees. That was the UC Davis study. So here we've got on this graph here on the right, it's a 24-hour day. And we pulled this actually from a high altitude area. And so in the beginning hours of the day, you could be running your furnace and that's fine. The blue line demonstrates what the emissions are if you kept a 14 nanogram or compliant system steady state through the day. That would be your line. But at some point in the day, you could switch, the heat pump system would work, and that would work for a bunch of hours. The problem comes with later in the day when the temperatures drop again, and you need to then operate the furnace. So when you start doing that, on the right side of the graph is when the emissions start getting greater in a dual fuel system with a non-compliant furnace than if you just had a 14 nanogram per joule standalone furnace. So we just wanted to kind of demonstrate and provide that for you. Next slide, please. So this is an overall of our recommendations. So for the high altitude areas, we'd like to extend for a year the sell and install of the condensing and non-condensing furnaces to allow those manufacturers that have been challenged with COVID to be able to do the proper testing and to provide that more consumer choices up there in that region. We also would exempt up in that area for the uses of the dual fuel, even in an additional year from that. When it comes to the weatherized, in order to address, again, a sell-through or managing your inventory, we're providing a whole full year extension on the weatherized, the compliant weatherized systems. Again, the dual fuel systems for the weatherized would just follow suit with that extension, and again, in that high altitude area. With regard to rebates, $500 rebates for those installing compliant systems, whether it's in the high altitude, weatherized, or dual fuel, and $1,000 for an all-electric system. Next slide, please. When it comes to implementing that rebate program, as you know, we did develop that program back in 2008 under the board's direction. We initially had some seed money at $3 million, that was exhausted, but we also got to get out and early deploy and get compliant about 5,800 furnaces out there at that compliant level. So a really good success there. Currently, however, with these proposals that we're making, we are asking again for another $3 million from our budget. So what budget is that? Well, in that 2018 amendment, we add additional mitigation fees. That additional has accumulated about 4.5 million. So we're asking about 3 million to put into these rebate programs. And we're asking that rebate program to be implemented by the same group that we had implementing it all along, which is the Electric and Gas Industries Association. So the setup is already there, so we can kind of launch pretty quickly. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we just want to propose our amendments at the next board meeting in September to extend the compliance dates for high altitude and weatherized. We're not recommending conducting a third-party study that was raised back in the June. Frankly, there isn't not enough time for that, but we also feel that we've built in plenty of options and incentives. And we're also seeking the board to approve us to move ahead with our rebate suggestions. And that concludes my presentation.
Very good. Thank you for that presentation.
You bet.
Board member comments and questions before we take public comments?
Mr. Chair,
Supervisor Rutherford, go right ahead.
I want to thank staff for their work on this and for listening to my folks up at the higher elevation. I think we have taken care of their needs. And I know I've talked with you. I just want to talk to my fellow board members about the timing. I'm looking at this again so we can figure out whether the technology has gotten to where we need it to be or whether we need to extend the review, at least for those higher elevations. I would leave it to the rest of you to discuss the implications for the flatlanders and whether they should have those same options. But my constituents have been taken care of, and I appreciate those efforts.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you, Supervisor.
That's important to hear. Thank you.
Any other board member comments before we take questions from the public?
Mr. Chair, I do have a question.
Sure.
I believe on your slide about the rebates, one of your last slides, that you mentioned there's $3 million available for the rebates. And if that runs out, that would be it. There would be no more rebates. Do we have any kind of crystal ball, I would say?
I wish. So just for clarity's sake, we have already gotten, actually it's 4.5. So the fund has gotten, has grown. That fund will continue to grow because there's still some other, whether it's the weatherized or even the mobile homes furnaces are still part of that program as well. So that will grow. Just as a side note, we're only asking for $3 million at this point in time.
I see. Okay.
After that, I guess it would be up to the board's discretion on further funding.
Michael, that fund will last as long as we need it because we do have mitigation fees coming in as well.
Yeah, again, it's hard to it's always hard to predict. We do monthly updates with the EGIA group to and we can report back to the board as we move along. But we also overestimated too, as well.
And I would also agree with Supervisor Rutherford to bring this back, say in a year, review where we are with our manufacturers. We expect them to step up and start doing the 14 nanogram. So anyway, I would agree with that recommendation as well.
Great. Okay, we'll do some check-ins.
All right. With that, we'll go ahead and take our comments from those that are here to comment. First up, I see Miguel with his hand raised.
Yes.
Go right ahead. Yep.
Hi. So I'm a HVAC contractor doing business since 1984, and since I was a child with my dad. I hold a number of patents, and one of them is in this industry. One of, amongst other concerns, my biggest concern is as a contractor doing business, I'm a 5-star company that has to maintain, I live and die by that rating. And I've seen equipment through the years that has been problematic. And whether I manufacture it or not, I'm the guy that gets, they point the finger at me, My concern is twofold. One is that this new equipment has been problematic in failure rates. It's also, I have a major concern with the longevity of them. On I've had some in operation that I'm studying very, very carefully. And I'm concerned about their long-term viability. In other words, I feel that we're going to start having trouble with this stuff sooner than later. And up till now, well, I have been basically when I propose a unit to one of my clients, I give them my personal opinion and say, okay, here we have these new products, and our only alternative is either to go with a heat pump or to keep your old furnaces. I educate them and let them pretty much make a decision. They're electing to keep their old furnaces because of the concerns of long-term how long are these things going to last? So in a nutshell, that's pretty much what my major concern is. In the short run, because of what the manufacturers have had to do in order to achieve what you're asking them to do, they've had to really push the envelopes of it is going to get kind of technical. I'm going to try to stay away from that. But
Miguel, just so you know, you do have a 3-minute timer and you're about to run out of time. So I'll give you another minute to wrap up if you could.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and I'm pretty much it. That's my major concern. So for right now, I'm just trying to avoid putting these things in until I think that they're to the point where we can be more confident in them. I guess one last thing real quick is the technology can be developed further and better and more efficient. But I think if there was some sort of incentive program to that end, the manufacturers are going to give us something better than even what we have now with a type of catalytic system. Anyway, I guess that's it.
Thank you for your comments. All right, with that, we'll go on to Jeff Small. And again, I'll remind everybody, we do have a 3-minute timer for our speakers. So please go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, I'm on the Zoom side. Can you hear me now?
There you go. Go right ahead.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Small. I'm a general manager for U.S. Air Conditioning Distributors. We are a privately owned, locally based HVAC distributor. We have over 400 employees. We've got 50 locations. Most of those are in California. And again, we are locally headquartered in the City of Industry. And we've just celebrated 30 years in operation in Southern California and beyond in the HVAC industry. So as a representative of US Air, I'd like to say that we fully support the 1-year extension for the weatherized units to September 30th of 2021. I think as you've realized, the impact of COVID-19 cannot be overstated in delaying the manufacturers the much needed and valuable testing time for these new products. It's important to understand that these weatherized or really packaged rooftop units, the market is a lot more complicated than it was for the non-weatherized gas furnaces. For the most part, a gas furnace is about 3 feet tall and about 2 feet wide, and one size somewhat can fit all in many applications. When we're talking about these weatherized rooftop units, the jobs are much more complex, depending on the mounting location, the style of ductwork, the outside air requirements, different airflow and filtration requirements. It's a lot more complicated. So as such, the manufacturers need more time to design and test those units, and as well the specifying engineering community, because we're also talking about light commercial here up to 5 tons. So a lot of these commercial jobs do get designed well in advance of when construction begins. So that's a further complication. As it stands today, we stock 4 different platforms of rooftop units, all within the same tonnage range, just to satisfy the needs of the weatherized rooftop market. So again, for that reason, we also very much support an additional sell-through beyond September 30th of 2021. You have to understand that the third quarter is the busiest time of the year in the HVAC industry. A lot of the older equipment is going to fail during the summertime, and those jobs, after they go through permit and plan check, that's September, October is really a peak installation time for a lot of these rooftop units. So we need an additional sell-through so we can make sure that we can legally install these units that have been specified, have been ordered from the factory, may still be in production by our manufacturers and en route to a job site. It would be very costly for all involved to be stuck with some stranded units beyond September 30th of 2021. Additionally, I would like to say that we do support the increase in rebates from $500 to $1,000, but I'd like to add that I'd like to see that extended to the ultra low NOx gas products as well, and not just the heat pumps. I would say that the $500 rebate we had in the past did not fully.
Thank you for your comments, Jeff. Your timer ran out there, but we got most of everything there. Jeff Winter. Jeff, you should be unmuted. Go ahead. Jeff, can you hear us? Jeff, one more time. Can you hear us there on your side? I think we heard you for a second. Jeff Winter. Everyone else can hear me, right?
Yes.
All right. All right. Well, Jeff, we're not hearing you. Maybe try attempting on the calling number and raise your hand there, or we'll try and come back to you one more time. But we'll go ahead and go to Chris Forth. Chris?
Can you guys hear me?
Yep. Go right ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I apologize ahead of time. My internet has been pretty unstable, but I represent Johnson Controls, and we the York, Coleman, Luxair brands of products for the market, and just a couple things. We want to thank the staff for the year extension on the weatherized. We feel like that's needed for us. Impacts of COVID, and like the distributor just heard this, we'd like to request a small 60-day sell through for the weatherized, really for that commercial side of the business, where the jobs are longer lead times and you have roof curbs to mount up to. That's a much different sale than a residential. And then as far as the dual fuel, we really feel like the dual fuel is our, with the 40 nanograms should be allowed at all, even the Flatlanders. We will increase consumer choice. And I did a little weather check, and the last time it got down below 32, in LA, where the majority of the population is, I think was back in 1979. So with the heat pump setting like that, you would really never hit the gas furnace if we go with what the staff has recommended of what they call a 32-degree switchover point. So it would run the heat pump the majority of the time. And the higher elevations, it would be pretty minimized, but of course the population density is not as great there. But we also agree with the incentives increase to make that jump, which, to go to some of these other systems is quite a bit more from a technology difference and so forth. So I'll end my comments there and thank the board for their time.
Thank you, Chris. All right, I have Dave Whittingham. David? Oh. David just fell off my list there. How about David Stevens? I still see David Whittingham's come back, and also David Stevens. David Stevens, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm also with Johnson Controls, and I would like to continue from Mr. Forrest's comments regarding the incentives. Our cost analysis has shown that there's at least, there's over $1,000 difference in the cost of units, and a $500 rebate just it disincentivizes people to buy an ultra low NOx unit. A second item, which I think is very important, being a doctor myself, is that the study, dual fuel system study, by extending the time period for those studied, you have an excellent opportunity to validate what I think the initial studies show, that dual fuel can be that bridge to electrification that California is pushing for. But to really understand it, it gives you an opportunity to collect field data and the actual applications. Finally, the switchover point of 32, while has been historically the practice, there are alternate approaches to that. And I would ask that the staff consider other options. For example, if you allow the use of the low NOx systems, the 40 nanogram per joule furnaces, you have a wider range, which increases consumer choice, but also allows you to use higher efficiency systems, which increases your control options. So in general, we think the staff did a great job, and we thank each of you for your efforts, but would ask that you consider these other factors also. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. All right, Nelson Ditcher. Nelson?
Oh, yes. Thank you. This is Nelson Ditcher from UC Davis. Yeah, I would just kind of like to reiterate that although a dual fuel system with a low NOx furnace can emit more than an ultra low NOx furnace when the conditions are extreme, in the majority of the climates in the district, as has already been said, the temperature rarely ever drops down to 32 degrees or lower. Another thing I wanted to kind of ask was, you mentioned that a different paradigm where you're looking at volume rather than concentration. Could you clarify what you meant by that? That's all I have.
Right. So, Chairman Benoit, can I jump in?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So the current rule is structured in a way that it enforces it's on the manufacturers to ensure that the products that they're making meet a concentration level, 14, 40, those sorts of things. Okay, and then it continues on down through the supply chain system as a compliant unit. When we say that the dual fuel system will generate, as you noted, it's under certain conditions that it will be meeting those lower emissions. So if we want to ensure that by allowing that dual fuel system in there with that non-compliant furnace and ensuring that those emissions that we're not backsliding, we have to make sure that doesn't, occur. Then we would need to monitor those on a mass daily basis. You already have the concentration of 40, but the question then is, how long are you operating, ensuring that you're operating the electric heat pump? And I want to say that it was your study there, Nelson, it opened our eyes up too, to say, it's a good point. Like in our region, we really can utilize those electric heat pumps, which is why we then decided, well, we should really incentivize the folks to just go ahead and, skip the dual fuel system, go right to the full electric pump.
Can I just jump in real quick? So there's two parts. Hi, this is Susan Nakamura. There's two parts on the emissions. One is the concentration of the unit. The second is the usage. So Rule 1111 focuses on the concentration because we don't regulate the end user on their usage. So if we were to go to a mass-based approach, then we would need to track the usage of the unit. So for many of our permitted sources or industrial sources, we look at both elements. We look at usage as well as the concentration. So Rule 1111 being more of a consumer product, we're focused on the concentration of the furnace itself in terms of the NOx emissions.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and take the rest of the comments and we'll come back for any other questions. We'll go ahead and go on to Kelly Lindemore. Kelly?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, go right ahead.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you for your time. My name is Kelly Lindenmoyer. I am the gas furnace product manager at Trane Technologies. I would first like to thank the district staff for the proposed extensions for weatherized and high altitude applications and for their continued dialogue on dual fuel systems. It's greatly appreciated. Two really brief points that I'd like to make. First, I would like to address the enforcement concerns that were discussed. While we still believe that it's improbable that anyone would tamper with a dual fuel system, creating some of the concerns that were mentioned, we have worked to address some of the enforcement concerns raised around temperature switchover points and improper system installations, using methods that are identical to the ones that are proposed for high altitude 40 nanogram dual fuel applications. Measures can be put in place to prevent that system tampering on both weatherized and communicating condensing and non-condensing units across the entire district, not just for high altitude. In addition to that, we've proposed some unique California-only model numbers, if you will, to make it easier for inspectors to be able to quickly distinguish which units are intended for dual fuel to help with some identification on that end. I'd also like to quickly address the idea that allowing dual fuel with the 40 nanogram creates somewhat of an inequitable situation for manufacturers. Really, today, customers are limited to the system choices that they have versus what they had with a 40 nanogram furnace. And the proposal of the inclusion of dual fuel into Rule 1111 is really centered around being able to provide consumers with the largest number of options while simultaneously reducing NOx and CO2 emissions. There are still many instances where a customer will need a furnace only replacement, or they simply won't want a dual fuel system, which creates the need for the ultra low NOx as it exists today. So at this point in time, all manufacturers have invested in ultra low NOx. We're just concerned about the gaps that still exist that we feel need to be addressed for the customer's sake. Due to that and just overarching, again, benefits of dual fuel, we just like to propose and respectfully request that dual fuel be considered at all altitudes, not just high altitude, and without the time limitation, since, as we mentioned, the climate's really temperate and the benefit could be long lasting. So with that, thank you again for your time. Thank you again to staff for all of your dialogue. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your comments. Mark Ramirez.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go right ahead, Mark. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Mark Ramirez. I'm a contractor, and I've done a lot of projects. Recently, we did a project in Southern California Edison where we provide over 5,000 projects through a efficiency program. And we were awarded Contractor of the Year. So I'd like to say that I have some experience on the real world conditions that we as contractors, we live every day. And it comes down to our design conditions that we have to deal with. So, I'm concerned about the heat pump only option simply because of the fact that we just had some rolling blackouts because of the amount of electricity being produced by air conditioners. And now we're proposing, if we go a lot of heat pump, well, we're just adding more electrical to the grid. So let me give you an example. Okay, when I do calculations, I have to comply with Title 24 rules. Today's homes are more energy efficient. Homeowners are replacing windows and they're doing more energy improvements in their home. Therefore, I can cool a house with a smaller air conditioning capacity to meet their comfort levels or what the design conditions are. Now, when I have to use a heat pump and I look from the heating side, all of a sudden, because I have a small air conditioning unit on the heating side, I don't have enough capacity to heat the home when their outdoor conditions are met. So what I have to do is I have to add now electric heat, strip heat, which is allowed by code. And what does a strip heat do? Well, basically what it does is supplemental heat. When there's not enough heat to keep up with the demand, the electric heat will come on, and now the consumer is paying more electricity because they're using the heat pump with electric. Also, when it goes into defrost mode, the unit has to switch over back to air conditioning mode for a period of time so that it can de-ice the unit from frosting up outdoors. So now you got a consumer who has been put to use more electricity. We're putting more electricity on the electrical grid. I mean, we had 3.3 million homes on rolling blackouts. So I think that it should be considered doing the dual fuel system using technology. For example, right now when we do systems, we use Train as one of our products. And when we turn the system on, the thermostat communicates with all components and it has to recognize it. If it doesn't recognize something, it gives you an error code that's not communicating. I would think that they would have the technology available so that when we put the system, if the thermostat recognized that this furnace was installed by itself as standalone, then it would not allow the system to fire off. I just think that we should consider technology, not just from burning ultra low NOx. We should use technology as an option as well. Give consumers options, give contractors options as well. And so I want to thank you for your time and for you to consider this.
Thank you for your comments. Bruce Furman, Bruce.
Okay, is that better? Can you hear me okay?
Yep, go right ahead. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your time. My name is Bruce Furman, Commercial Manager for U.S. Air Conditioning Distributors located in City of Industry. And I want to speak for a second about the sell-through, and I hope I'm speaking for contractors as well. The sell-through that we're asking for is not the same as the extension. And I just want to make that clear. You have a proposal for extending it to next year, and I appreciate that. That helps a lot. But the sell-through helps us with issues that come up that we don't anticipate. For example, just to clarify, selling weatherized standard low NOx rooftop units from our stock inventory is not the same as selling low NOx rooftop units, weatherized units on plan to spec jobs. With plan to spec jobs, we provide the equipment as scheduled on the plans of coordinated shipping time frame with the contractor. They have to understand jobs are going to bid next summer are already being designed today. And that's something you have to keep in mind. There's not a lot of changes that we can make because permits are pulled, funding's in place, and then the architect says, get the green light to go ahead, and then it goes down the food chain, and eventually the jobs come out to bid, especially school jobs. There's going to be a lot of school jobs bidding next summer, and we can't disrupt that. And now let's say we have some jobs that are going out and they're designed 6 months to a year ahead of time, and they come out to bid. I have to bid and provide what's on the plans, especially on DSA jobs. You can't just change those. So if an engineer, if he specifies a weatherized low NOx standard unit, that's what we're going to bid. And then we have to coordinate that time frame with the mechanical contractor to make sure that we meet your cutoff date, which is fine. We can do that if everything goes right. But a lot of times we provide the curbs on the job, getting ready for the unit installation. And let's say we ship out the curbs in August, and we think, well, we're going to get the units in September, and then they find asbestos in the building. Everything comes to a stop. Or maybe there's funding on a commercial job. The funding is lacking. It comes to a halt. COVID hits again, comes to a halt. Now I need more time. Or I tell the contractor, sorry, you missed your cutoff date. I can't provide these units which fit the curbs which you already installed. You have to have a couple of months of wiggle room in there. Otherwise, you're going to disadvantage the contractors, the people supplying the equipment, the engineers who designed the job. DSA is going to be flooded with all kinds of more work going back that they already did. I just see that as, irresponsible on our part that we don't have some kind of time frame after the cutoff that we can still complete the job as scheduled and as designed. So that's my 2 cents worth. And appreciate you if you would consider that. Thank you.
Chairperson, can I ask the speaker a question?
Sure.
I found the points to be very valid, but I didn't get any clarity as to how much additional sell through time they were requesting. Is there
2 months, 60 days.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's what was mentioned earlier on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chairman.
No problem. All right, our next speaker, Tom Kennedy.
Hello.
There you go, Tom. Go right ahead.
Thank you. I'm Tom Kennedy. I am the engineering manager for residential weatherized product for Train Technologies. And I appreciate everybody giving me the opportunity to speak here today. Also, I want to thank staff for keeping an open mind about dual fuel applications. I think that's great, and I definitely appreciate that, especially in the high altitude applications. But I'd also like to ask that staff consider allowing the dual fuel in the lower altitude applications because, as I think it's been mentioned before, it's going to have an even greater NOx reduction than in the high altitude applications. And I think everybody's familiar with the UC Davis studies at this point, but their studies and Train studies both indicated, average NOx reductions of 96%, and that's huge. And that far exceeds Rule 1111 goal. So here's the important part I wanted to share today. Train currently has multiple connected dual fuel systems in the South Coast region, and being connected means that Train has access to actual historical data that these systems have accumulated, as well as real-time data. So what we did is, Train, we found what we believe was the coldest day in LA in 2019, and we analyzed the actual data of those systems that are installed. So for this particular day that we found, only 26.6% of the heating time was done by gas heat. The remaining 73.4% was done by heat pump. So this equates to an average equivalent NOx output of 10.7 nanograms per joule, which is well below the 14 nanogram per joule requirement. And we got to remember, this is actual data on what we found to be the coldest day. So then we took it a step further and we also looked at the actual data for the entire heating season of 2019 on these same units. And what we found was that only 4% of the time spent in heating was gas heat. The remaining 96% of the heating time was heat pump heat. So that's a huge difference between the gas heat and the heat pump heat. So I wanted to bring that up, being as it's actual data that we have access to. So, and Mr. Krause has pointed out possibly wanting to move toward total heat pump or electrification eventually. So a dual fuel system, and at least in my opinion, would give the consumer an option of, instead of jumping straight from a gas heat to heat pump heat, would give them a period of time to at least.
Go ahead and let him wrap that up, and I have a quick question for Mr. Kennedy as well.
I'm sorry, can y'all hear me?
Yep, go right ahead. You wrap that up real quick, and I've got a question for you.
I was just saying that I believe dual fuel would be a great transition eventually to if you went to total electrification. It'd give the consumer time to get used to a heat pump and still have the gas there for when it did get below 32 degrees or whatever the set point is chosen to be. And it gives dealers and installers and service techs more time to get comfortable with the heat pumps also. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I ask you too, can you tell us about the efficiency of a heat pump air conditioning system? If you're putting that in and you're changing out the old existing air conditioner, this is obviously more for the summertime question with electricity usage. Is there a big incentive to doing that? And does that change sort of the math for that consumer during the summertime as well?
It all depends. It all depends on the climate, right? So if you're running the cost of the higher efficiency product, if the initial investment, if you're not running your AC very often, then economically it's not going to be good for you, right? You're going to have a lot of money in, and your payback is probably going to be a lot longer. So let's just say, like in Illinois, where you're running your AC a couple months out of the year, you more than likely would not invest in a high efficiency system because the payback would be so long. Yeah. But in the southern climates where it's warmer longer, then you're going to see a higher investment. People are going to invest in it because the payback's going to be much shorter, and they'll get their investment back. I don't know if I answered your question because it's all climate dependent, right?
Right. I guess my question is, if they're moving to this heat pump system, does that give them an advantage over if they were to stick with their current air conditioning system and just go to a 14 nanogram furnace?
So if they went to a heat pump, you can get different efficiencies AC and different efficiency heat pumps. The equivalent heating of a heat pump is a little different than a furnace, but
okay. Thank you. I appreciate answering the questions there. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question that's along these lines, if I could ask.
Sure.
There's been several comments about allowing dual fuel in across the board.
Right.
And so my question is, and your slide 6 does say this, that Rule 111 allows a 14 nanogram joule furnace to be part of a dual fuel system. I'd like to get a comment on that from our staff. If that's allowed, we're not really preventing dual fuel systems at lower altitudes. Am I understanding this correctly?
That is correct, Council Member. Currently, it's allowed, there are units out there, dual fuel with a compliant 14 nanogram per joule system. So I would agree. We're not discouraging folks from installing dual fuel systems, and we would support that.
And Michael, what's the cost difference for if you're going to do a complete system with that type of setup, 14 nanogram versus 40 nanogram? What's the cost difference there?
Sure, Paul, if you could just go to the next slide, and we'll we'll have that right there in that comparison. So for the compliant dual fuel system, it's about 4,500, and but it is a little less, of course, for the non-compliant, and that's why we wanted to propose the consumer rebate to try to make a difference.
And for that dual fuel 14 nanogram, do we have an end date on that, or that's open-ended right now as far as how long we could install it, right?
It's based on availability of funds.
Yeah.
For the incentive, but as far as for the rule, we don't have an end date on that being an
Oh.
option, right? Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't think, okay. Just
Right.
double check. Does that answer your question as well, Councilmember?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
I
Sorry to
think,
jump in there.
Chairman, if I might, I think the issue is that it appears that 80% of the products sold don't meet any of those guidelines. So, right, if I remember that correctly, Susan, 80% of the products sold for residential markets aren't the 14 nanograms per joule.
I'm not exactly sure what part you're referencing.
Because I think that the comments we're getting are about the 40 nanograms per joule dual fuel systems, not the 14. Is that correct? Is that I think that's what the council member was alluding to. The comments that we're getting from the public are not about the one that was shown on the slide, but the 40 nanogram.
To allow the 40 for a period of time.
Right, so just to back up a little bit, so Train, we had looked on their website, and they're very supportive of heat pumps, all electric heat pumps, and I think it's that's the direction we want to go, and I think where Train's going is a good direction. They want to reduce greenhouse gases, and so that's why when we look at the chart of the number of models that they have that are certified to the 14 nanograms, they have less. And so that's why we're putting in the $1,000 rebate for the all electric heat pumps. And Chris Forth from Johnson Controls, he even said that if you look at the climates in Southern California, that the likelihood that you would even use the backup furnace is highly unlikely. So it's like, I think the direction, it's like all electric heat pumps, very good. We like that. No combustion source, zero emissions. We want to put a nice, healthy rebate in there. On top of that, Edison has a rebate that'll be between $500 and $1,000. You're going to offset almost, $1,500 to $2,000 by installing an all electric heat pump. So I think it's like we're trying to answer all the different comments and questions and give the consumers the variety that they're looking for. And still, it's like we're going in the direction of emission reductions.
And I appreciate that, and I think everybody on on this committee is supportive of transitioning to where the staff wants to go. But my question was more about, I remember when we did a briefing, you said that the 40 nanogram per joule systems make up 80% of the marketplace or something like that. It was overwhelmingly that product type. Does that ring a bell? That it's the super majority of what's sold?
Oh, I know. It's probably the condensing and non-condensing units. So there's the categories are condensing, non-condensing, the weatherized, and then the mobile home units. Those are kind of the three major compliance states. But the condensing and non-condensing are the overwhelming majority of the units in terms of so that was the first compliance state. And the manufacturers have already stepped up to the plate. All of them have 14 nanogram per joule condensing and non-condensing, and now they want to still allow some of the 40 nanogram per joule furnaces as built into the dual fuel. We're saying you already have the 14 nanograms. I understand some manufacturers may not have as broad of a suite, but we already have the 14 nanogram per joule standalones, and we have those standalones can be incorporated into the dual fuel systems.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
All right, I got two more public commenters and we'll come back to the board. Dave Whittingham. Dave, can you hear us now? Dave,
can you hear me now?
There we go. Go right ahead, Dave.
Okay. I'm Dave Whittingham. I'm the Senior Engineering Manager of Regulatory Affairs for Linux International. First of all, I'd like to thank South Coast staff for their efforts in the amendment proposal. Linux first introduced a portfolio of compliant non-condensing and condensing furnaces in 2017, including those that match with our highest efficiency, variable speed, air conditioning and heat pump products. Linux is actively working to introduce both weatherized and high altitude products and fully supports the current amendment as proposed and believes the current amendment proposal allows for full development of the weatherized and high altitude products. Linux does not support further amendment to allow 40 nanogram per joule products broadly in dual fuel applications. We believe this undermines the efforts of compliant manufacturers who have been heavily invested into a broad portfolio of compliant 14 nanogram per joule products. All Linux 14 nanogram per joule non-condensing and condensing furnaces can be configured in dual fuel applications to provide further NOx reductions beyond the 40 nanogram per joule applications. Again, Linux fully supports the amendment as proposed. And thank you for your time.
Oh, sorry. Next up, can we, Jeff, go ahead and thank you for your comments.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go right ahead.
Excellent. So it turns out that the 14 nanograms per joule really wasn't necessary at all, and that it's been discovered that dual fuel is the answer to the problem, but no one ever thought about it before. So as time passed over the last couple of years, and people started to think about how to truly reduce the emissions of the furnaces, this transition that everyone is speaking about, which is the appropriate answer, of moving to dual fuel to electric, is probably the solution. So now we're grasping onto the 14 nanograms per joule and saying, well, you gotta have this 14. In fact, you don't have to have the 14. The 14 nanogram per joule furnace was only the way to get everyone to start thinking about how to reduce emissions. In fact, the heat pump is the solution. The only reason that anyone needs the 40 nanogram per joule furnace at all is for the coldest nights, of which you found one. So out of 365 days in the year, you found a high altitude need. Terrific. What you're telling me is 364 days of the year, you don't need it. So why do we need to go back and produce 14 nanogram per joule furnaces at very high cost to consumers when all we're really needing is an air delivery should there be a terribly cold night, which we have so few of? Let's give the homeowner the options. That's what this is all about. But you're headed in we are finally all headed in the right direction, which is get rid of fossil fuels and let's go to electrification. And we can do it, but we don't have to do it through 14 nanograms per joule and produce every single variation and version of furnace, 80, 90, 92, 95, 96% furnaces. It's just not necessary. We don't need to do instead of holding back. And by the way, the sell-through on package units, I thought about it as everyone was speaking, not to digress, but I thought about it. And there is a way to solve the problem where people don't stock up on, which you are concerned about, stocking up on inventory, and that is to register the job with the district, register the job that, that they're talking about, because commercial is different than residential. I think that's a solution.
Jeff, you were breaking up a little bit here and there, but I think we got the bulk of your comments. And thank you for making your comments.
Thank you.
All right. Last speaker is Cody Naveen. Oh, and then Cody disappeared. Oh, Cody, can you go ahead and unmute?
Can you hear me now?
Yep, go right ahead.
All right, fantastic. I'm Cody Novini. Thanks for having me on. I'm a contractor in Orange County. Want to first say thanks for the proposal of the $1,000 rebate for heat pump systems. We've been doing a very large amount of those, and that would be very helpful. A large issue is we have a very large, vast amount of clients, different types of clients, and having multiple products available to those different types of clients is very helpful. So thanks for the rebate. That's fantastic. It'd be awesome if we could get more, but being able to have dual fuel with a 40 nanogram would also help us install compliant systems for clients. We are a compliant type of company, so having those options would be very helpful for our clients. To talk about going with an ultra low NOx dual fuel system, that's a very cost prohibitive installation. It's not going to have many clients wanting to do that. Nobody would really recommend it. And there's a cost comparison that was shown that's approximate cost of materials or equipment, although it doesn't include labor difference. There's a very large difference in labor cost involved in installing an ultra low NOx furnace versus a standard 40 nanogram per joule furnace. So that labor cost is not being discussed or shown here. So it'd be great to have that involved here. It would show a big difference in the reason to have a dual fuel 40 nanogram furnace used in that type of a package. There are heat pump efficiency concerns that come up. I do believe that that's because most people have an old inefficient air conditioner. So they say, why would I want to use my air conditioner during the winter season too, when I don't have to spend much on gas to heat the house? Well, a new heat pump is obviously much more efficient. So it's going to be much more efficient at heating as well, not cost the same that you see in your current summer months to cool the home. So these systems we're using, we're doing a lot of them. They're very beneficial. People love them. There was a little bit of concern with the heat load calculation and a heat pump not being able to heat the home. Most gas furnaces, when tied in with the proper size air conditioner that's used on an actual heat load calculation, which is how to design a system for a home rather than just using square footage, most gas furnaces are actually oversized for the house. So a little bit of insulation on some homes, but for the most part, that air conditioner turned into a heat pump is actually the right size for the home. And I guess the long-term reliability of the ultra low NOx furnace is a very large concern that's not really being supported. If we have huge problems, who's going to fix it?
Cody, thank you for your comments. And I think that's our last speaker I have on the list. Come back to our body. What's the pleasure of the body? Committee. Judith, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Are you recognizing me?
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I want to thank staff because I know they worked hard on this and they come to some good compromising solutions. The one issue that I have been wondering about is the sell-through period, and this is for the weatherized furnace. It seems like there are special problems. These are usually commercial kinds of projects. And we had one speaker that identified what can happen with that kind of commercial project where you're signing the bids and contracts early and then the project may get delayed over the process. I'd like staff to comment on that. Is there a solution, as was suggested, that the contractor can register the job with the district and therefore have an extension of time if needed on a particular project? Or in general, how does staff feel about allowing an additional 60 days sell through on that particular furnace?
Mayor Metcher, this is Philip Fine, and before Mike answers, I just want to give a little bit of background on this issue. Our original proposal for the extension a few months ago was 6 months, and then we heard the stakeholders ask for an additional sell-through of up to 6 months. So we actually are proposing one step further and just making it simple and giving them 12 months, right? So you can imagine that sell-through period, there's a lot of tracking and limitations on that. But if we just gave them a 12 months to allow them to manage their inventory, they could start managing their inventory in the original 6 months without any tracking or anything. So we thought that was a good solution. We went one step further than was being asked. Now we're hearing they want another 60 days on top of that. You know, it's up to the board, but we're just trying to make it simpler and easier and not have this level of registering and tracking.
So one of the speakers did make a distinction, however, between the termination of the sales period on a particular model and a sell-through period following that termination date. Do we not recognize there's a distinction? I mean, what you're saying to me, Phil, is that, well, they can manage that inventory in that year preceding that sales termination date, and so you don't need additional sell-through. Is that what you?
I mean, there's a distinction in the way in how the requirements would work. But if you think about it, if you're in a sell-through period, would you rather have to do all that tracking and sell-through, or would you just rather be able to sell? So to us, like just extending the date is a simpler way of extending the sell-through period and giving them much more flexibility. If they need more time, we're hearing the comments now that they need 14 months versus 6 + 6 or 6 + something else. So, I mean, Mike, Susan, you can weigh in on whether that, you know, how we would build that in and what the tracking mechanisms would have to be.
Well, having talked to the manufacturers about this issue, Phil's correct. And the challenge we had was actually just kind of what you're hearing today. Some people had said we need 60 days. Some said we need 30 days. Some said we need 3 months. Some said we need 6. And we're like, you know what? Let's give them flexibility. Let businesses make their choices. We did talk to one manufacturer that did talk about this extra timing and support of this just openness because they can work with their distributors. Remember that the manufacturer's one element, right? And they have a number of different distributors who have different supplies and demands, right? So some distributors have a lot of products, some have very few. So the ones with the few maybe don't need all that time to sell through, right? So and others need longer. So that's why we kind of viewed it as providing them the flexibility to make their business decisions as they reflect their needs.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that.
If I could just add to your question, I'm still slightly confused on that one because Phil made an excellent point. So the extension goes to when? Can you just say the dates one more time about
the proposal?
September 30th, 2021.
So 1 year extension.
So I think that was the original request, and you know, we gave them the 6 months. Now they're asking for an additional 60 days. To us, we see no material difference between the sell-through and the extension of the mitigation fee, because if we allowed them to sell additional units in the 60 days, we would still charge them the mitigation fee. It wouldn't make sense not to. So I think it's, you know, we did the 6 months, and now it's, you know, can we have another 60 days? I think is what we're asking for. We're saying, well, can you just manage your inventory in October? That's your 60 days if that's how you want to sell through. But yeah, we'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Susan.
All right. Any other board member questions, comments?
So, Mr. Chair, I would move the staff recommendation on this.
It's just an informational item. We don't need necessarily a vote on it, but I think staff's looking for any other recommendations we might want to bring to the full body.
I do have some comments. So if I might, Chairman.
Please go ahead.
I think I'm satisfied with the with staff's response on the sell-through. I think what staff is proposing is efficient, and I now understand it. At first, I thought the sell-through was still an issue, but I think that you have covered that in a more flexible way. So I won't be looking for that. It sounds like the higher altitude areas are covered. So I am happy about that. Thank you for spending time with that. And I'm still torn about rebates and the 40 nanogram per joule dual fuel units. So I still want and fully support the manufacturers that have gone the distance to create the different models so that customers do have options. And I applaud the rebates, but I was hoping we might go further. Okay, so this is my thought. I do recall that really people are going to still want options from what I gathered from all the public comment. And this 40 nanogram per joule dual fuel system is still important to a lot of people. But I support staff in wanting to push for the ultimate goal. And if we increase the rebates from $500 to $1,000, it would make them more cost effective than the 40 nanogram per joule dual fuel system. And if we reduce or increase the rebate on the heat pumps to $1,500 instead of $1,000, that makes it almost comparable to the 40 nanogram per joule system. Is that something that you think is feasible with the amount of funding that you're seeking, or would that change your calculation? Aside from I know you're not supportive of the 40 nanogram per joule, and there had to be discussions about that, but I'm just, thinking through how could we still come to a compromise that helps customers who want to make progress. That's what I want to get to, people who actually want to make a change, but for them, it's there's this fear, and I'm sure it's around like the blackouts, and maybe some of it is not exactly logical. I don't want to make any determination about that. But if they had options, but we still really incentivized the more efficient units, is that something we could think through? I mean, what do you all recommend about that?
Well,
Senator Delgado, let me jump into this one. So the challenge is that we have a finite pool of dollars available. And if we double the rebate, we're going to effectively limit the amount of units that are going to be out there. So we're competing against ourselves and trying to get the most emission reductions as opposed to sort of maximizing the dollar opportunity. And I think what staff had proposed is really sort of that fine line between trying to get as many units out there as well as trying to get the emission reductions. We start tipping either way, we start losing either the number of units that get out there, or we lose out on the total dollars. So that's kind of the challenge that we would hope that you'd consider this amount. Now, if there are other considerations, I think Senator, that given the current economic conditions, we are really watching the financial wherewithal of the overall district. So in part, I'm trying to keep an eye on those aspects, as well as making sure that we have the program and policy to really promote this technology.
Totally, and I respect that. But I do know that, for example, on the similar program that we have for the lawnmower program, we don't actually use all of our money. But I know that for the electric vehicle ones, we have, that's oversubscribed. So do you have a sense of where this one might be?
Well, go ahead, Susan.
Okay, I do think that we will exhaust the funds. We did exhaust the funds for the first 3 million for the condensing and non-condensing 14 nanogram per joule furnaces. We have heard from a manufacturer that they're very, very interested in the 14 nanogram per joule weatherized. We do know that Trane, based on their website, that they are pushing for all electric heat pumps. That's their solution, and they quote their solution for compliance with Rule 1111. So I think it's, and in part, we heard a lot in the last stationary source working group or stationary source meeting from Mr. Novini, Cody Novini, about where he felt that he was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. And this all electric heat pump with the rebate helps those installers that are dedicated to a certain manufacturer that makes a switch to go to heat pumps to now provide a little path forward for them as they're trying to move that technology, which is a good technology. So,
Susan, if I can add, maybe this goes to the senator's point, is that there are other incentive programs available for these units. It's definitely for the full heat pump. We know that Edison has some rebates. I don't know if there's anything available for dual fuel systems, but maybe staff knows, or we can check into that, because you can stack these incentive programs from different agencies to maybe
Yeah.
make.
I-
Right.
We're actually looking at our AC went out. But I did look at Edison's website. I don't think they have a rebate for the dual fuel. Before we move off of this item, I don't know where we are, but I just wanted to make sure that I responded to the third-party study because it did come up and we didn't respond to it in the presentation, but staff didn't pursue the third-party study based on timing. And we hope we have answered, most, if not all, of the other questions and comments and recommendations from the board in the package that we're presenting. So.
I'd like to just turn it back to you, Ben, and get feedback from the rest of the committee.
Sure. My other committee members, any other comments?
Mr. Chair, I guess I would simply say that notwithstanding Wayne's comments, if the 40 is good in my mountain areas, I would be happy to see it extended elsewhere. But as I said at the beginning, my constituents have been taken care of. I will leave it to those who represent more of the flatlanders if that's something that they want to pursue. But I would be supportive of that.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and share my concerns unless one of the board members wants to speak up. But, as we all look at these various incentive programs and everything else out there, I'm personally looking at a new water heater right now. And I'll tell you that trying to find a heat pump water heater that's advertised on Edison's website as having $1,000 manufacturer rebate has been almost impossible for myself personally here in Southwest Riverside. Everyone wants to push me towards a tankless gas water heater. Mainly because my home, like a lot of other homes in Southern California, have not been set up for full electric of anything. The electric panel that you might have in your house, just unless you've bought a newer house in the last couple of years, is probably underpowered for the ability to put in an electric heat pump, especially if you go full electric heat pump, we need 240 volts and a large amperage for that. And then if you're also looking at an electric or hybrid water heater, there's another 240 amp circuit. If you've put in an electric car, there's another 240 amp circuit. If you put in solar, there's another couple 240 amp circuits. So my point is that the cumulative effect of all these things is not just $1,000, like staff shows on one slide, because it's at some point you run up against, you also then need to replace your entire main panel and electrical system for your whole house. A very costly endeavor. So, my thought is that there does need to be a path for the 40 nanogram, mainly for those folks that are trying to go this direction. I get if what we want to do is incentivize the 14 nanogram and disincentivize the 40, but I think there should be a path. And I would ask staff, before we bring this back to the full board, that we have that option so that the full board can wrestle with this issue. I think it's a very large issue, and I think it's something that I want to make sure we have some opportunity and some path for in the future. And I recognize that all that 40 nanogram still has an end date, even for the mountain communities, of 2022. We stick with that end date, but we give this opportunities for the market to move that direction. I think that's helpful. And I think the more we can move the market in the right direction as far as electrification, I'm a supporter of that, but I also recognize where we're currently at, especially with what happened this last week, where we see the electrical grid coming to a bit of a screaming halt here in our summertime. So, I think that there has to be some path there. I would look at my board colleagues. I heard from Senator Delgado. I think she's on the same page, and I'd be appreciative of their input. But we also have to get to the other items on our agenda. So unless there's some absolute, no, we can't do that. And I get staff's concerns about having to monitor that. Again, Train brought forward that they have some monitoring capability. Maybe that's part of that. But at the end of the day, as we look at these various systems, folks are going to want to use what they have available to them. If they've gone all electric, they've gone all solar. I just don't understand where they would try and tamper with that system to that degree to use all gas. But I understand that concern too.
Vice Chair.
Those are my comments, and I know we need to get to the rest of the meeting unless there's some other major comments we need to make.
Vice Chair, I just wanted to say that, so this is on set hearing. We set hearing for this last month. There are provisions that we do need to go to the board because we have a deadline responding to EPA. And so what I would suggest is that we will continue to address these issues, keep this on the agenda, and if necessary at the board meeting, Hopefully we can have some kind of resolution, but at the very least, if we need to bifurcate it, we can do that at some point.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Gideon?
Yeah. What exactly was your proposal in terms of changing the staff recommendation?
That we do look at some opportunity in the lowlands for the 40 nanogram for a short period of time to allow this transition to happen, and to also incentivize or further incentivize, like Senator Delgado brought up, but by doing that, offset that cost with maybe disincentivizing the 40 nanogram.
Thank you.
I'm supportive of, having the full board take this up. And I'd like to see the 40 nanogram per joule dual fuel system as an option. I can't say that it would be fair to recommend exactly what that means today, but I think that the full board should opine.
I agree. Okay. With that, I've been asked by staff to go ahead and move on to item number 3. I think we do have some comments on this item too. So if we can get a short presentation and so we can get to public comment on this, I'd appreciate it. And staff, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So this is regarding proposed rule 1179.1. It will regulate the NOx emissions from publicly owned treatment works or sewage treatment plants. Next slide, please. So as the rule will be applicable to approximately 90 pieces of equipment at 30 facilities. It will encompass boilers, turbines, and engines, and it'll address NOx, CO, and VOC of that equipment. Next slide, please. Most of the provisions come from 5 existing rules that we'll be combining into one rule. This will cover basically all the requirements, but specifically the emission limits I'd like to talk about. Next slide, please. With the emission limits, we went through a BART assessment process because these types of sewage treatment plants are unique and have unique challenges, and we focused the BART assessment on those particular units only. Next slide, please. The proposed emission limits that we'll be having for Rule 1179.1 will be the same as what exists currently for boilers and engines. However, turbines, through the BART assessment, we are proposing a new lower limit of 18.8 parts per million for NOx. Next slide, please. We do include other provisions in the rule, namely for startup and shutdown, and also for the monitoring, reporting, and record keeping. These will be to address some concerns that EPA has spoken about in other NOx landing rules that we've done for the reclaim transition. Next slide, please. Originally, we had this as a key issue working through the permits, but though this week, I believe we resolved that issue. And at this point, we're ironing out details of combining those 5 rules and 100 pages of rule language into a rule that's roughly 30 pages. So we're just ironing out those details, and I believe we'll be accomplishing that over the next week or so. Next slide, please. The cost effectiveness rule is roughly 50,000 per ton of NOx reduced. That includes some costs that are associated with permits, with units that won't have any emission reductions. The cost effectiveness for the main reductions associated with the rule are $48,600. These come from the turbines, which are the main source of emissions. And while those emissions, the emission reductions we have here is 0.05 tons per day, appear rather small. That represents about 16% of the total emissions from all this equipment and a 25% emission reduction from those turbines. Next slide, please. So we do plan on having this for the October hearing, and that concludes my presentation.
Very good. I do see a public comment on this one. Mr. Rothbart, David.
Good morning, everybody. This is David Rothbard. I represent the Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts, and I'm also the Air Quality Committee Chair for the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works. I want to thank staff for working with us on this rule. Again, we're combining 5 rules into one to have a biogas rule. We really appreciate that. We don't have any major issues with the rule, but as was said, we're consolidating everything, and there's still some work to do to finalize language. We got some language last week, about 10 pages of additional rule language we're still going through. We don't see any major issues. The devil's in the details, combining 5 rules into one, and we don't see a problem with the schedule. We're not asking for a delay. Just wanted to bring it up to board members that we're just looking at the details, and hopefully everything will go well. And again, just want to thank staff for working with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to hear that. Next up, Stefan Jespin. Stefan,
Hi,
go
can you
ahead.
hear me?
Yep.
Hi, my name is Steve Jepson. I'm the Executive Director for the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works. You know us as SCAP. Thanks for the opportunity to comment today. I've said it before, but I think it's worth repeating. SCAP works with many different regulatory agencies, including other air districts. And we really appreciate the respectful interaction we've had with South Coast staff in general, and especially on this rule. The professionalism and transparency of South Coast Air Quality Management District is really top notch, and it's a positive reflection on the organization. Of course, the requirements of some of the rules and permits are stringent and sometimes challenging for us, but we recognize you have your mission, and it's an important one, and we have ours. With regards to 1179.1, I wish to echo David Rothbart's comments. This is a great rule. It's a much needed rule, combining several rules into one. It's well written. It's also moving fast, and we are doing our best to keep up with the schedule. We're doing a thorough review to make sure there aren't any unintended consequences on all of SCAP's members and their POTW equipment. At this point in rule development, we're not seeing any significant issues. As David mentioned, there's a few details we're working out. And I want to mention that we are striving to complete our review. We're not currently asking for additional time. And once again, thank you for the opportunity to comment, and thank you, staff, for working with us on this rule.
Great, thank you very much. Next speaker is Leslie Witherspoon.
Good morning still for a few minutes here. I also would like to thank staff for working with the stakeholders on this rule. And with the new language, I am, like the two prior speakers said, just working my way through it. There was a new add on the turbine section. I am with Solar Turbines, so I am mainly just looking at the impacts to the turbines. There's a sliding scale for digester natural gas mixes that I'm looking into. I have not yet had enough time, primarily because we're on a shutdown this week, to be able to talk to the combustion engineer and team or other OEMs to ensure that even with add-on control, that the levels that work out of that calculation are technically achievable. So I do want to make sure that that's possible. I don't anticipate needing any extra time either. Want to appreciate, again, appreciate staff working with us on that, but just I will be in communication as soon as I can to make sure everything's a go there. And that's it. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you very much. Board member comments or questions on this item? Not seeing anyone jumping up and down or raising their hand. All right, thank you for the presentation. All right, we're gonna have to, in the interest of time, go ahead and trail items 2, 4, and 5 to next month's meeting because we do have a technology committee that needs to get started. So with that, unless there's some member of the board that really needs to speak to one of those items, I'd like to go ahead and go to our written reports that are attached.
Can I ask a question on the AB 2588 item?
Well, we're going to bring it back next month. Do you need to hear it now, or can we wait till next month?
Would it be permissible, Chair, for me to ask the staff? We're expecting MATES 4, I believe it's called, information soon. It relates to toxics. Is that still on schedule for release in early fall? Can I ask that question?
Sure, staff.
Yeah, just briefly, not quite agendized, but yeah, we are working on it. It's actually MATES 5. This is the 5th installment. We are targeting getting a draft out by the end of the year. Obviously, there are a lot of other priorities and resource challenges at the district. All the monitoring has been done, and there's still some more modeling analysis that has to be completed. So we're actively working on it and targeting the end of the year and starting a bit of a public process to get drafts out.
Thank you for that. It is a
The longest
priority.
yes I've heard.
Yeah, there's a lot of priorities, but that definitely is a priority.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, we'll bring those items back to the next meeting. We have a written reports attached. Any questions on those, anyone? All right, any other business from our board members? All right, do we have any general public comments? This is for any item not on the agenda. If you have public comment for items not on the agenda.
No public comment.
Very good. All right, thank you, everybody. And sorry I went long on that first item, but I know there was a lot of good discussion there and I appreciate all of it. Everyone have a great rest of your day, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.